Greetings, I'm Mark Kennedy, a public policy fellow here at the Wilson Center. You know, foreign policy can only be effective if it has the support of citizens across the states. And there's sometimes a de-link between national foreign policy interest and the interests of the states, or at least the understanding at the state level. So in order to better understand how foreign policy of the United States is viewed from the states, we're very thrilled to welcome Governor Asa Hutchinson to begin a conversation on the view of the states, which we hope will be a series here from both sides of the aisle at the Wilson Center. Governor Hutchinson brings a wealth of experience to this topic. He is finishing his second term as governor in the state of Arkansas, and he brings the experience of having been a U.S. attorney, a U.S. congressman, the administrator of the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, and the first undersecretary of Border and Transportation at the Department of Homeland Security. To give an understanding of just how effective he's been at that, he won his re-election with 65% of the vote in the state of Arkansas, which is the highest level vote for a governor in the state's history. So it's a wonderful honor to have him here. My focus here at the Wilson Center is on strategic competition with our international great power rivals, but I am joined here by Risi, whose focus is on environmental change and how it impacts security. So between the two of us, we hope to have a conversation that covers the range of issues that are in foreign policy. At the end of that, we'll be turning it over to the audience here and online with your questions. So I will turn it over to Risi for our first question.
Thank you, Mark, Thank you, Mark, and welcome, Governor Hutchinson. We're really delighted to have you here. When Mark told me about his idea for this series, I thought it was a really wonderful idea. I'm from California, and when I go home, DC feels very far away. And so having these really sort of dynamic conversations with our state leaders on how foreign policy connects to state interests, I think is a really important conversation, and thank you for being our first. I'm going to start sort of with something that we're all very aware of, which is Russia's war in Ukraine. We've seen how the war has had sort of really underscored how energy systems and food systems are interconnected across the globe, and you see sort of the rippling effects of the crisis in Ukraine on food security, on energy security, whether it's Europe or the US or East Africa, right? So I wonder if from Arkansas's perspective, what, if any, has been the effect of the war on Arkansas, and how do you view sort of Arkansas's role in responding to the crisis?
Well, thank you, and I'm very honored to be here at the Wilson Center. I'm grateful for this opportunity to talk about trade, foreign policy, and the relationship of the states. And, if you look at Arkansas, we're a state of entrepreneurs, we're a state of producers, and so we depend upon the global market. And for example, Arkansas produces almost half of the rice produced in the entire United States of America. And so we produce more than we consume. We produce and we depend upon global markets, whether it's Brazil or whether it's Europe or whether it is Asia. And that is true in reference to the impact of the war in Ukraine. And I go back to the days long ago in which Jimmy Carter imposed the grain embargo on Russia. And it seems like, times are turning back and almost in the same direction. We haven't imposed a grain embargo, but it was significant news that Russia decided not to continue the blockade of grain coming out of Ukraine, which was a huge reversal. It is good news for the global food market, and that impacts Arkansas. It impacts Arkansas in terms of the prices of the commodities that we produce. We produce soybean, we produce all kinds of grains and commodities that will be sold across the globe. Secondly, it's impacted us in terms of input costs. Whenever we have economic sanctions on Russia, it results in higher fertilizer cost that goes into our agricultural products. And so the difficulty of getting the inputs into our ag commodities has been a challenge for us. The supply chain has been challenging. And I'm speaking of agriculture, but this crosses the board. And every bit of inflation that we have right now, starting with the inflationary cost of energy and gas, it really, to me, goes back to the change in energy policy of this administration early on, and then it was compounded by the war in Ukraine. And so all of that has escalated to increase energy costs across the country, but also it had a devastating impact on our supply chain. It hurt us in all of the costs across the board because, the delivery of goods depends upon energy to transmit those goods across the country. And so it has had an impact. Notwithstanding all of that, Arkansas is very supportive of those that are trying to protect their sovereign territory in Ukraine. Might talk about it in terms of our air defense products. In Arkansas, we have Raytheon, we got Aerojet Rocketdyne, and Lockheed Martin. Lockheed Martin makes the HIMARS. CBS did a great story about how a small town in Arkansas is helping to change the war in Ukraine and tip the balance of power, and that's because of the HIMARS, which is the mobile artillery rockets that are produced in Arkansas by our defense industry, is helping fight the war in Ukraine. And so there's a lot of connections there. I believe that we need to have a winning strategy, and I'm talking about a winning strategy of Ukraine that we support. And I think we have that broad support for continued support for Ukraine in our state and across Middle America.
And you mentioned trade and the trade that Arkansas does. You could argue that, I guess, 1 out of every 2 acres of rice is exported that's grown in Arkansas. And some of the other products you make, whether it be the poultry, graders, ammunition, organic chemicals, steel, a lot of stuff is exported. And trade is not always well understood because people don't oftentimes see the jobs that are supported by those exports or the lower cost that consumers receive by expanded trade, but are focused on those that are hurt. How is it well understood within Arkansas, and how do we perhaps have it be better understood? What is the benefits and challenges of trade?
Well, the benefits are enormous, and as I said, if we shut off trade or we reduce trade, then we're going to be losing jobs in Arkansas. We have 350,000 jobs in Arkansas that are broadly dependent upon global trade. Now, of course, that's agriculture, that's manufacturing, and we have $15 billion of economic activity because of trade. Much of it is Mexico and Canada as our 2 leading trading partners, but we also have, Mark, Dassault Falcon Jet, that if you buy a Falcon Jet anywhere in the world, you fly in Little Rock, Arkansas to pick it up. Sort of one of those bragging points as a state, and it's because they do the final assembly there. And so that's trade. It is our aero defense industry that, excels in Arkansas, that's a leading manufacturer and export commodity for us. But then also we have Walmart, we have Tyson's that, export protein. Tyson's exports protein, and so they're dependent upon the global market. And so you go on and on down the list, and I don't believe Arkansas is unique. I believe that every state can point to the same type of trade and the importance of it, and jobs are created. Your question about do people understand the relationship between jobs and well-being in our state and the importance of global trade, sure, there's a differing opinion on that, but I believe that there's a broad understanding of it. And these are the difficult decisions. I remember when I was in Congress, we debated It was right after they did NAFTA, and then we were looking at most favored nation trading status with China. Well, you know, I supported that. We passed that in Congress. We opened up increased trade, and it was divided, though, in Arkansas. You had those that understood that trade, the importance of it to a state like Arkansas and opening up that market. And then you had others that, with fierce independence and belief that that's the wrong direction for our country. So there's a divided viewpoint, it's still divided today, probably more so in reference to China, and we can talk about that more. But Arkansas, you look back to our state, we have, you know, J. William Fulbright, founder of the Fulbright Scholars and program, and so that's international. When I go to Asia, I can talk about Arkansas connection to Fulbright. They all get that. And so we've always had that connection, but it takes every generation, every leader to reinforce the connection between our rural states and global trade and the importance in job creation and economic activity in that state.
So thinking sort of the flip side of that, which is how, you know, your job is to govern a state and ensure that the sort of thinking about what the U.S. federal level doing is going to benefit the state, right? So when you think about federal trade policy and how that could be improved in regards to the Arkansas people, and what steps the federal government could do to strengthen trade policy for Arkansas.
Well, clarity is important. I want to say consistency, because consistency means that you know, businesses can rely upon trade and the opportunity for expansion as they do capital investment. So clarity and consistency in trade policy is good. And anytime trade is used as a tool of foreign policy, that ought to be a serious debate, because that disrupts the reliance of businesses on that opportunity for trade. It might disrupt the investments that they've already made. And so I think that's important, consistency and clarity. I also would argue that we just need to constantly look for more markets, because we're all producers in the United States of America, and we want to have access to global trade and foreign markets for the goods that we produce. You know, you just narrow that down to Arkansas, whether it's agricultural products or whether it is our manufacturing. And in Arkansas, I think it's 80% of the exporters from Arkansas are small and medium-sized companies. These are not all the Walmarts of the world or the Tysons of the world. Small and medium-sized companies are 80% of our companies that do trade. I would make a specific case about Cuba. I was the first governor to visit Cuba after we restored diplomatic relations with that country. And as I went there, and I'm familiar with the debate. When I was at Homeland Security, we enforced the embargo, and we've always tried to put pressure on that communist state and on the Castro regime to reduce the repression of freedom, to open up their markets in a more free enterprise way. And as I went there, they are hardcore communists. I mean, it's more difficult than dealing with China in terms of centralized control. They are still true believers, is what they preach in Cuba, for their spirit of communism, and it's somewhat startling. But at the same time, you know, we were able to sell some chicken down there that they desperately needed. And you go into the food markets in Cuba, and they've got freezer, the beef case, the protein cases are empty. Or either that, or they just simply have it from Brazil. And so I just don't know, I don't believe that food ought to be used as a tool of foreign policy. And so right now we can export, but you have to have cash on the barrelhead to make the transaction. I think we need to open it up to credit transactions when it comes to food products that would go to Cuba. And to me, that makes sense for our agricultural producers. It's not going to tip the balance in favor of the regime. It's simply going to provide a greater commodity availability for them, competition with Brazil and other countries. Why should Cuba have to buy from Vietnam? Why can't they buy from the United States? That would help our farmers, and it's not going to strengthen the regime that's there, which we all want to see brought down.
Well, there's no question that trade is a trade-off between those that benefit the people that have their jobs due to exports and those whose jobs are put at risk, but also balanced by the consumer benefits. But you're right. If we had more people like our farmers focused on exporting all the time, I know having my history in Minnesota farmers know what the Brazil weather report is for that day. I'm sure that whoever grows rice in competition with Arkansas, the same is true. But you mentioned Walmart. There's the trade that Walmart participates in, but then Walmart is also, I think, the largest retailer in Mexico, very significant operations in China and India. And as I drive through the very prosperous and growing northern Arkansas, I have to believe that some of the jobs there and some of the prosperity that we're seeing in northern Arkansas is due to the fact that you have a global business that is not just engaging in trade, but very actively involved in selling in other parts of the world. What are the benefits of having these global companies in a state, and how do they bring benefits to Arkansas?
Well, it's extraordinary. You have Walmart, you have Tyson's, both global companies. In South Arkansas, you have Murphy USA, but also Murphy Exploration that does global exploring for oil reserves. But if you just look at Northwest Arkansas and you ask about the benefits, and Walmart has been extraordinary, not just as a company, but also the Walton family of entrepreneurs has made a big difference for our state. They invest. They created the world-class American Arts Museum and Crystal Bridges there in Bentonville. It's one of the fastest growing regions of our country. They believe in recruiting talent because you have a workforce that they are continuing to grow, and so they want to improve the quality of life for everybody in Northwest Arkansas so we can recruit that talent. When they come there, they want to stay there. That's why we have world-class hiking trails and biking trails for the heritage bikers and the mountain bikers, and we have the downtown living that attracts the millennials. On and on you can go, that they have made a difference in terms of their investment, and it's because they know they need to grow and they've got to recruit talent there, and the same thing is true for Tyson's. So these are that generate wealth, but they also generate philanthropy that they invest in the community that makes an extraordinary difference. So very proud of that partnership with them. And whenever you look at Walmart, for example, they're building a new international headquarters, and they could build it anywhere, but they chose to build it in Bentonville. And as they build that, they made the decision that they wanted to make it out of CLT, cross-laminated timber. Well, it's going to require so much cross-laminated timber to build their new international headquarters in Bentonville that they actually had to recruit Structurlam out of Canada to put a new facility in Conway that can actually produce that quantity of CLT. And guess what? They're using Arkansas timber that helps in jobs in South Arkansas in the timber industry, in which we produce and we grow more timber every year than we harvest. And so just an example of where there's cross-benefit from a growing global company that invests in your state.
So thinking about the sheer size of Walmart, right? It has a GDP on par with a lot of small countries. Are there challenges that come with being a host to such a large company?
I knew you were going to get to that question too. Well, first of all, the benefits by every stretch of measurement outweigh any challenges that come from it. So it's extraordinary to be able to have them in Arkansas. But in terms of challenges, you know, there's always some conflict between a global company that supports a diverse workforce and the needs that they have versus, you know, some in the legislature that wants to slow down the change in culture in our communities. You have some conflict in that fashion. But let me come back to China though, because that is. I mentioned that I supported, when I was in Congress, most favored nation trading status. And we did that based upon two principles. One, that China would be able to follow the rule of law and the international rules in governing trade and responsibility of nations that come into the global marketplace. You've got to follow the rules. That was sort of a supposition, and their entry in the World Trade Center and participation in that was part of it. And the second one was that by increasing trade, that China would naturally enhance freedoms in other areas. You cannot have entrepreneurship standing alone in terms of freedom. Economic freedom generates other types of freedom. Well, in both instances, China has disappointed us. They have not followed the rule of law. They have not followed the international rules in terms of trade and enforcement and not stealing intellectual property. And they have become actually just as repressive, if not more repressive, in terms of Hong Kong, in terms of human rights and other freedoms in that country. So that is, you know, somewhat of a conflict. With the fact that we have our largest company that has massive investments in China, and not just a company, but all the consumers are depending upon that supply chain that comes from China. And so, you know, it will take us 6 years if we moved a supply chain of our consumers away from China. It takes that long to move. But I support and believe that we need to have a supply chain that is not China-centric. And so there is that conflict? I don't know. I think it's a reality for America. And we're first changing that supply chain when it comes to our semiconductors and our technical industries. But at some point, we're going to have to continue to move our manufacturing supply chain overall to more friendly venues that will be a better partner with us.
Well, that will certainly be a challenge in the years ahead. We've talked about the trade aspects, but there's also the foreign direct investment aspects of how does that impact a state. And you've already mentioned Dassault Falcon, which is French-owned in your state. And governors are oftentimes trying to attract foreign direct investment into their state. You just mentioned Canada coming in and making that investment for the wood product. But we have an increased focus on scrutinizing that with CFIUS having an expanded agenda as to types of investments they're looking at. As a governor who's trying to attract versus federal government, which is putting on these scrutinies, where do we get the right balance? What are the issues we ought to be thinking about there?
Well, let me start with just the importance of the foreign direct investment in Arkansas. Over 500 global companies have operations in Arkansas. And we're a relatively small state of 3 million plus people. Over 47,000 workers, and 60% of those workers are in manufacturing. You mentioned Dassault Falcon Jet, which we're very proud of, but we have French companies is one of our leading, from L'Oreal to Dassault that I've mentioned. German companies. We have Japanese, Tokusan that is there, that was recruited during the Clinton administration. Clinton administration is when he was governor of Arkansas. And so foreign direct investment is very important for our state, and I have concentrated on it. And so my first trips as governor, and I've probably taken as many foreign trips promoting our state, recruiting foreign direct investment as any governor, But I remember going to China during the Obama administration while I was first governor, recruiting China investments into Arkansas. Well, that was probably one of the regrets that I have. At that time, it made sense because that was a ripe market for recruiting foreign direct investment. But then, subsequent to the Obama administration, we had the Trump administration that came in and got into a trade war with China. And the result was that, the investments turned sour and the investments never came to fruition. And so it didn't cost Arkansas anything, but I sure wish I would have taken that time to spend more time in Japan and in South Korea and other countries that are proving to be more reliable in terms of foreign direct investment and increasingly good relations with the United States. As we have the foreign direct investment, sure, we need to inspect it, and we need to make sure that we have some protections against foreign control that impacts our national security interests. We have a process for that. And do you want me to talk about that some more, or are you going to ask me a question?
Go ahead.
So, it's really a timely question because, we just had Elon Musk that just acquired Twitter, converted it to a private company. But I saw that, I believe it was Senator Chris Murphy that filed a letter with CFIUS, which is the Committee for Foreign Investments in the United States. It's an interagency group that reviews our national security interests for foreign investments. And I think it's an appropriate letter that asks for a review because you have a $1 billion plus investment of an existing shareholder of the publicly traded company Twitter that is from Saudi Arabia, is a leader in Saudi Arabia. And so now that's converted into a private company, but it's less than a 5% ownership interest. But one of the cases that Senator Murphy made was that Twitter has sensitive personal information on people. And one of the criteria for the review is, one, does it impact our national security interests? And that is included, is there a risk to compromising personal data on our citizens? Now, I think there's an easy solution. I think what CFIUS will do is it's not a majority control. It's a minor investor in the company, even though it's a lot of money. But ultimately, I think they will set some protections in there to make sure that they don't have access or decision-making authority over that. And so these are important reviews because, and the investment is made not always by a foreign country, but by private sector enterprises that are coming in. And so obviously, when you're looking at investments from the UK, you're looking at investments from Germany, you don't have the same national security concerns as you do if it's investment from China or from Saudi Arabia. And so there's different levels of review. It's important to have those, and I think the system is working fairly well, but you don't want to strangle foreign investment. You just want to make sure that there's the right standards in place to review. For example, if you're acquiring land, and that's always a concern in Arkansas, you can't acquire land by a foreign entity if it's close to military installation, or if it is puts them in a position of collecting intelligence information, maybe by a research institution. These are appropriate concerns, and I'm glad they're being reviewed, but hopefully it will not detract from the exchange that we have with our foreign competitors. Because when we talk about opening our market, when we want access to their market for trade, well, obviously they want access to our market. It is a give and take. And if we are soliciting foreign direct investment and we start cutting that off, then we're going to get cut off too from our companies investing in their countries. And so we've got to be fair about it, but at the same time protect our national interest.
Do I get to ask my climate change question now? Yeah. So, as a director of the Environmental Change and Security Program, my take on climate change is that it's actually the context in which all of these things are happening, right? It's not a single issue. It's going to be interacting with trade and economies and people's mobility and movement and access to resources across the board. But one of the hallmarks of climate change is that while it's a global phenomenon, how it hits different geographies and locations is very specific, right? And so I wonder if you could share some of the key challenges you see on the horizon for Arkansas when it comes to climate change and the strategies that the state is incorporating in order to sort of be proactive in addressing them.
Well, first of all, we are engaged in diversity of energy sources, reducing our carbon footprints, and I haven't mentioned it, but I've got to now, so I've got to do an advertisement first. I'm going to come back to that question, but they're related. And the steel industry has been big in Arkansas. And so we have Nucor Yamada Steel, Japanese investment. Big River Steel was a U.S. investment that produced a incredible state-of-the-art steel mill on the Mississippi River. And then we competed with other states, but we won the competition, and United States Steel is building a $3 billion new steel mill near Osceola, Arkansas, and it will be 900 jobs, and each of those jobs will pay over $100,000 each. So extraordinary win for the state, and when U.S. Steel goes into production, Arkansas will pass Pennsylvania as the #1 steel-producing state in the nation. And so there's the bragging point. Now, how that relates to climate change, it was a very important aspect of the transaction and the commitment of the state is for their energy sources. They wanted to have a very strong mix of solar. And we find this is true with any new investment. People want to look at the sustainability part of it, and the energy mix is critically important in our competitive environment. I mentioned L'Oreal, a French-owned company. I went out and toured their facility, and they're looking for more biofuels, more alternative energy sources because of the European Commission rules that require them to move quickly. And so it's naturally happening as well as happening as a result of foreign direct investment as part of it. And so Arkansas solar energy is in our mix. We have nuclear energy. We have hydro power as well. And of course we have traditional coal, but most of the companies are switching to gas, which still has a footprint, but there is a gradual shift in making sure that we can have a diversity of energy sources in our state. In terms of where we are, though, as a nation, I think we will continue down the path of carbon reduction and making sure that we can guard against dramatic climate change and do our share of this responsibility. But what has happened from the war in Ukraine was a wake-up call to Europe. It was a wake-up call to the United States. And we cannot go so far overboard into dramatic changes in our energy production that jeopardizes our security now. And not only do we need to be energy independent in the United States of America, we got to produce enough energy for ourselves. We need to produce energy for our allies so that they don't have to rely on Russia, or we don't have to go to Venezuela and Saudi Arabia. If anything has been pressed into the mind of Americans today is we've got to produce energy. And sure, we want to have a diversity of energy sources. In Arkansas, we're doing what many states are doing, but we're going to be having electric charging stations. We're investing in that all across the state and we've recruited an electric vehicle manufacturing facility in northwest Arkansas. So these are all part of it. I have the Council on Future Mobility looking at the alternative ways of transportation and delivery of goods from electric vehicles to drone delivery, to automation. And so all of that is protecting the supply chain, but it is also being sensitive to our environmental issues at the same time. What more should we do? I'm asking you a question now. You're not going to allow that.
But we do want to get to audience questions here, so maybe we can get a couple more amongst ourselves, and then we'll turn it over to the audience. But I wanted to make sure that we talked about the military impact on the state of Arkansas. You know, you're the head of the National Guard, and so you get a sense as to how we're doing on modernization. But one interesting thing happening there at Arkansas is the possibility of Fort Smith being able to do training on the F-35 for Singapore and perhaps other countries. Maybe you could talk about how do you see the military from the perspective of a governor, and how does it impact you?
Well, first, the National Guard is critical to keeping our citizens safe in the state. I depend upon the National Guard, and we have a good federal and state partnership in terms of the role that they play. They can be mobilized for federal purposes. They have served in Iraq. They've served across the globe. They're trained and available for federal service. But in the meantime, they're critical as we have an ice storm or we have flooding, that I call upon the National Guard to be of assistance. I've sent them to enhance border security down on the southwest border in partnership with Governor Abbott. So the role of the states need to be preserved, and that partnership with the federal government needs to remain balanced. In terms of the overall military structure, one of the things that I did as governor was I created a council on our military installations. And it was designed to support our military installations, realizing that they bring us economic benefit as well. And they've made a big difference for us. And one of the results is that Fort Smith, Ebbing Air Force Base, they are in a winning position for F-35 training of foreign pilots. And so Singapore looked at Arkansas, looked at other states. They chose Fort Smith, and it's going through the appropriation process now. But then we had something happen over in Europe, which was, of course, Russia invading Ukraine. And all of a sudden, I met with the German ambassador, and they're acquiring F-35s, and they need a training site. And yes, they liked Ebbing Air Force Base and Fort Smith. So it looks like if this can come to fruition, we'll have both Singapore but also Germany. And it's a dramatic change. I mean, Germany demilitarized after World War II, of course, and President Trump and other presidents have tried to get Europe to engage in supporting their own defense structure there. And all of a sudden, they're doing it, and they're doing it at lightning speed. And this is a good thing, that not that Ukraine has the threats from Russia, but it's a good thing that Europe is taking that responsibility for their own security and that we can be a part of it. So whenever we look at foreign direct investment, we look at the impact of global trade, the investment in our training of foreign military is an important part of it for our allies. It gives us good training experiences with them. It helps put the investments overseas. It helps keep America safe as well. And then finally, I've got to say, when it comes to the military, that the supply chain impacts them as well. And whenever you look at the numbers of the decrease in our U.S. Navy ships, whenever you look at how we need to modernize our fleets and our weaponry, we can't be dependent upon foreign sources in that manufacturing as well, both for security purposes, but also efficiency and cost purposes. And so we've got to make sure we continue to invest in a modern military that is applicable to a post-war, post-Cold War environment, but addresses today's threat. But it's going to take continued investment as well as investment in that supply chain.
Do you want to go to the audience for questions, or should we?
Maybe just one more on immigration. And
Okay, yeah, one of the, some of our colleagues have done some research on immigration from the Marshall Islands. And I know with the Compact of Free Association, a lot of the Marshallese migrants have moved to Arkansas, right? I think you have a big proportion of the folks that have moved out of the Marshall Islands, and they are very active in the community and have developed a very vibrant diaspora, and in many ways are sort of an example of how to do migration well, right, in terms of integrating into the community and building sort of the social ties and social cohesion. I think they're very invested in the poultry industry, right? They're very active as employees with Tyson's and others. I'd really like to hear your view on immigration and the benefits that you see migrants bringing to the state, and how the state, what kind of policies and programs can facilitate that mobility so that it benefits both the migrants and the receiving communities.
Well, the Marshallese are incredible people. We have a great relationship with them. It's a unique relationship because they are here as Marshallese. They have free travel back and forth to, not free travel, but they have free access back and forth to their country. They got a unique legal status here in this in the country, and it's because of what happened, of course, with the nuclear experimentation there in the Marshall Islands, and so a lot of health consequences that come with that, but they're a big part of our workforce. They're a large part of our community, and the relationship has been very good. We've had to make some adjustments. They don't automatically qualify for Medicaid, so we've had to step up and cover them on that, which we're glad to do, and it was necessary. I don't think you can take, I think you can learn from it, so I don't want to diminish that. You can learn from it, but it's a unique legal arrangement with the Marshallese. But in a broader sphere of immigration, one, we should always recognize the importance of immigrants to our country in terms of our workforce, diversity, the energy that we have, the fabric of America, and how they embrace the freedoms that we have. Some might come here for nefarious reasons, but by and large, people come to the United States of America because they want the freedoms that we have, and that makes them great Americans. Now, we have to have that legal process, and no one is tougher on border security and the importance of that than I am, and we got to get that issue solved. But we just can't diminish the historic relationship that we have with immigrants. And I was proud of Arkansas that we have a very large Hispanic population. We have a lot of DACA students that, because of Obama's order, has some legal status, but they didn't have access to the professional degrees. So they could not have professional licensure of nurses or other professions. We went to the legislature, and the legislature overwhelmingly, in a bipartisan way, said absolutely, these immigrants should have access to all of the licensures. And I think that was right, and I think we have to resolve those issues because they came here when they were very young. They have a legal status here, and I think we have to give them the benefit of education, and us to have the benefit of them working in our states. Long term, you just have to control the border. And once you do that, you can have another conversation about changes in immigration policy. But you've got to start with giving people confidence with the border security. And I've had experience when I was undersecretary at Homeland Security. We were not doing as well as we wanted to do, and we had 1 million apprehensions during that year. 1 million. Today we're having 2.2 million, I believe we are right now. And so it's an extraordinarily expanded problem. that we're not addressing sufficiently, and people are losing confidence, and that's where you start.
Maybe you can let them know how they can ask your question online, and then we'll be taking a question here in the audience.
Sure. So for those of you watching online, you can submit a question in the box directly below the video that you're streaming. And then for those of you in the room, if you'd like to ask a question, you can raise your hand, and then when one of us calls on you, you're going to push the button on the microphone closest to you so that we can hear you, and the folks watching online, importantly, can hear you as well. Thank you.
Why don't we go to the third person back here on the left?
Oh, no, push the button.
So thank you very much. That was.
Oh, and sorry, please introduce yourself as well.
I'm Galeron. I'm a fellow, competition fellow here at the Wilson Center, and thank you very much for this conversation. That was fascinating, Governor Hutchinson. I was thinking about your discussion about the effects of the Ukraine war on the Arkansas economy. Does it happen that there's tension between the agricultural sectoral the interests of the agricultural sector of the economy and the industrial, the production sector of the economy, and also you as a governor, in terms of your vision to the future, would you like to see industry develop faster, or would you say you're for balanced growth of both sectors?
Well, first, in terms of the conflict between the ag sector of our economy and the industrial sector, I don't see any conflict there. Both have been impacted in terms of supply chain. Both have been impacted in terms of energy cost. In terms of on the export side, I mean, it's the demand has increased for ag probably more than the industrial side as a result of that, but not any conflict. Any conflicts really revolve around, how much do we continue to invest there? I mean, it should be $40 billion, should it be less, should it be more? But that is really minimal in terms of my state. It might be bigger in other states, but there's still very, very broad support for Ukraine. And a lot of pride in the fact that we're stepping up and we're producing what they need to protect themselves. No long war is good for America, and it wears thin on the American population, but the support continues to be there, and as a leader, we have to have a winning strategy in terms of what the message that this sends to others, to China and other allies, that we're a reliable partner. We're going to stand with them and stand with Ukraine, and we want them to get back their sovereign territory. The last part was about industrial growth, and no, I'm for fast. And when I think of industrial growth, I think of manufacturing. In Arkansas, we lost jobs as a result of NAFTA. A lot of them went to Mexico, but we had incredible experience in manufacturing. And so we're one of the top states with % of our population with experience in manufacturing. Those jobs are coming back now. And so it's reinforced, and we have great opportunity to increase our manufacturing growth. And we've got room to do that. We need to accelerate that, not just in Arkansas, but across the country. We know how to make things in America, and we never want to lose the capability of making things.
Online question?
Yes, so there's a question about, there's a handful of questions, but I'll start with one, going back to some of the conversation about China and trade. Are more Americans in Arkansas in favor of maintaining the trading relationship with China under the current party leadership, and how do public opinions or attitudes affect the state foreign-related policies?
Oh, I would say the vast majority of Arkansans want a tough policy with China. And, that is both in terms of for so long we've had unfair trade with them. They haven't opened up their markets sufficiently. They have engaged in theft of our intellectual property, haven't followed the rules. So they want to be tougher on China versus less so. Now, the second part of it is, what is the right policy? And is the right policy toward China any different than what I just articulated? And we do need to have a tough policy on China. I'll give you one illustration, is the precursor chemicals to making fentanyl. Fentanyl is killing our youth. It is hurting our families in America, and it starts with those precursor chemicals coming from China, and they're not following the rules in reference to the recording, the record keeping, the reporting of this, and they're not supporting life-saving measures that can be done. And so that's just one example where we've got to be tough to achieve some of our overall national security objectives. We also have to be realistic. In this time of inflation, you don't want consumer prices to double because we got tougher on China too quickly, or we interfere with that relationship. And it's interesting that I don't think the Biden administration, they haven't reversed the tough trade policies of the Trump administration, and they really haven't articulated a clear trade policy in reference to China. And so it's just really been on hold in my understanding, my judgment. And so I think China is a competitive challenge to the United States of America. We need to be clear-minded about them, that they're not demonstrating friendship. They are demonstrating wanting to be a global competitor of ours, and they want to win. And that doesn't make it necessarily wrong, but it says we've got to step up to the plate. And then they're wrong in many areas, which is their human rights policy and how they're not following the global rules of order. And so tough policy, I think, is the right way, but also a very realistic approach.
We'll go to another audience question right here.
Thank you very much, Governor. My name is Al Watkins. I'm an economic consultant here in Washington, D.C., and I've had the pleasure of doing a number of international economic conferences along with some of your colleagues in Little Rock. My question goes back to what you were saying with respect to the question before the last one, on manufacturing, and also some of your earlier remarks regarding the importance of SMEs. And I was wondering what, at the state level, policy-wise, you're doing to help the small, medium manufacturers with respect to marketing, not exporting, so finding markets overseas, training workers to do more technologically sophisticated things so that, higher productivity, higher wages, so on and so forth, moving up the value chain. And then also with my personal strong interest with respect to small or medium enterprises, technological competitiveness. In other words, acquiring the latest technology so that they don't become obsolete and outcompeted by manufacturers in other states or other countries. Thank you.
Great questions. And the small and medium-sized businesses do need more support. They don't have the manpower, they don't have access to the global markets, and so they need assistance. And so we have an Export-Import Council that's very active. I hosted them at the Governor's Mansion, celebrated some of the small business successes overseas, but they provide expertise. We have the World Trade Center in Northwest Arkansas that supports the small businesses looking at global markets. In terms of the training side, you're absolutely right. So we have different training programs. Some are federally sponsored, some that we do there in Arkansas. But we also, just from a technology standpoint, I've emphasized computer science education. The first state was Arkansas that mandated computer science to be offered in every high school. We went from 1,100 students taking computer science in the state to over 23,000. And that's just since I've been governor. In terms of bringing in technology businesses and growth, We've helped fund a accelerator program in different industries from healthcare to financial services that brings in startup technology companies, helps them to get started. We want to be able to land some of those in the state, but we're trying to become a micro hub of technology companies. We signed an MOU with Israel to have technology exchanges with them, and part of that would be the growth of cybersecurity companies and the needs there.
Maybe online.
He keeps asking too.
Yeah, I think we have time for one more, so we'll prioritize
Okay,
people in the
let's
room.
go ahead to the audience here.
Excellent. Thank you, Governor, for being here. My name is Rudy Novak. I'm a public service scholar at Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. So my question is about how you get the average Arkansan to understand and believe that international relations matters. So specifically, what are some things that you have done or have seen others do that has proven successful to continue to convince people to support international relations or national security policies that may require sacrifice from them, potentially, either higher costs and may be necessary to ensure national security?
Well, I want to make sure I get the gist of your question, but in terms of what we've, I mean, having conferences like this, having discussions like this in Arkansas, where we have our small businesses that are out there talking about, global trade and the importance of it to them. So we feature regularly the impact on small businesses, medium-sized business, and our jobs in the state from the both foreign direct investment, but the global trade side. And we've taken great pride when we recruit an industry from overseas that's expanding in Arkansas. I just came back from Europe, and we've had some success there. We're going to have some jobs announcements that an Italian company will be expanding in the state, and it creates jobs. And so that's part of the education effort. You mentioned security, though, and so much of this is driven from the national level and the concerns, and so people are listening to the news every night, and there's always a balance of reality and exaggeration there in terms of the threats, but people in Arkansas and across the country, I think, are very, very concerned about the threat from China. And so that's real. You don't diminish it. You address it. And the challenge is, reacting by saying we're going to cut off international students. Well, the exchange of international students is very important for the promotion of democracy across our globe. And so you don't want to react in that fashion. You want to react in the right way by having the right tougher policies, by making sure that we protect our intellectual property, by making sure that we protect our country from international investments that might be harmful to our national interest. So to me, that's the balance that we have to maintain. What did I miss?
Great. Okay, well, I want to, I think we're at the end of our hour. I want to thank you all for being here with us in the room, and for those of you watching online, thank you for tuning in. Governor Hutchinson, thank you so much for your time today and for sharing your insights and your experience. I've learned a lot, and I hope that you'll come back again sometime. And Mark, thank you for allowing me to co-host this with you. It was a real pleasure.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you. I really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Well done, Mark.
Thank you.